And this one is also my own personal pick of the week. And there's a few reasons for that, but the main thing is that I just think this game looks like a ton of fun, has a lot of things going on and quite a lot of player interaction, and it just plays in only 30 to 60 minutes, so that's a huge win. But what's really impressive is that this is a set collection game, which is one of my least favorite mechanisms, so me picking this as my pick of the week just means that I think they did it really, really well. But this is a competitive game where players are going to be trying to collect gems and artifacts in order to gain different sets for points and also gain different abilities. The game is going to be set up with a few octagon dungeons put out on the table, with each of those dungeons getting 2 random artifacts assigned to them, as well as a random effect. This effect is going to be specific to the dungeon. It's going to affect any of the players that participate in it, so players will want to be aware of how each of these dungeons work whenever they're assigning their cards there. And this is where another really interesting aspect of the game comes into play, because players are going to be taking turns having the opportunity to assign cards to the different dungeons, and whenever you're assigning a card, you can only assign it to the sides of the dungeons that have an opening, and once all those openings are fulfilled, that completes the dungeon, then that dungeon gets resolved. And players have a few different options when it's their turn to assign cards to the dungeon, because they can actually choose to assign no cards at all, or instead they could choose to assign 1 or 2 cards to one of the valid locations. Each of the cards is going to have a strength value, a creature type, as well as a special ability. And these abilities can do different things like modify, move, or remove cards from that dungeon, and they might only be specific to certain creature types. The interesting thing here is that a lot of them will just affect all creatures of that type. It doesn't matter if it's your cards or your opponent's, so players will want to be aware of this. And when you're assigning any amount of cards to a specific location on a dungeon, you also have the opportunity to place one of those cards face down. This not only prevents your opponents from having additional information of what that card might be, but it also changes the way that that card resolves, because rather than its ability becoming active immediately when it's played, instead it's going to be resolved when that dungeon is resolved. And this is where another really interesting aspect of the game comes into play, because your decisions here will affect how many cards you get to draw in the following round. And as a general rule, if you're doing things like playing more cards or playing one of your cards face down, those are all going to cause you to draw less cards on the following round. And I did mention that you can only assign your cards to the open spaces on the board, so you can't assign cards to where these walls are. But an interesting thing here is that you do have cards that allow you to move the cards within a dungeon. So this might allow you to get to certain locations that you were unable to otherwise. And this game does also have the concept of cursed gems that are all worth -1 victory point at the end of the game, and they also force you to discard one of your good gems. You'll want to be avoiding these at all costs, but that doesn't mean other players might not push you into them. The dungeon gets resolved once all of the open spaces on the dungeon have at least 1 card assigned to them, and then you're going to be resolving any of those hidden cards, resolving their effects, and then any of the remaining cards, you're going to be adding up the strength for each of the players, comparing the strength, and whoever has the most strength is going to have first pick at one of the artifacts. The artifacts are really nice to have because they can grant you some special abilities, or even give you additional scoring objectives. Once those artifacts are distributed, each of the players are also going to gain the gem that's associated with their card out on the dungeon, and then that dungeon is going to be replaced with a new one. The game continues like this until a set amount of dungeons are completed, and then players are going to be adding up all the victory points, and the player with the most wins the game. And of course, if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I have it linked down below, and you can click to get notified.